If I had to start my fantasy reading journey over again, these are some of the books and series that I would start with. And I'm going to go out and say Percy Jackson. If I started over today, Percy Jackson would definitely be a great choice and definitely a great place to start. Number one, because you have the movies already and you have the television series, which is, they've only had one season, but it is very accurate to what actually happens in the books. And it would be really, really nice to start reading a series and see it play out on screen and see if what you have in your mind is actually something that's good and interesting, right? So the next series that I would read is actually a series that I did read when I was younger, which is the Pendragon series. Don't hear a lot of people talk about the Pendragon series or recommend the Pendragon series, maybe because, I don't know, series is old or whatever the case, but it completely drew me in and it completely had my attention when I was a kiddo. And it was one of the first series of books that I actively was going to grab for, and no one had to like pressure me or force me to read this. It was something that was genuinely interesting for me. I asked for the entire series for Christmas, and I think my mom still has those books at her house. So the Pendragon series is totally worth it for young people. I don't know if I would read that as an adult, but it would be interesting to go back and like pick that up and see if I still could get into that. The next books that I would read would be the Harry Potter books. Yes, I know the author is controversial. However, I feel like if you are a fantasy reader or if you are interested in getting in the genre and you've never read the book, you're really missing out. Even if you've seen all of the movies, if you've never read the books, you're really missing out because there are certain details that are just not covered in the movies. And maybe they'll be covered in the television show. Who knows? Television show is already going in an interesting direction, whether that's good or bad. But if you've not read those books and you want to start reading or you want to start your fantasy journey, Harry Potter, you have to read the Harry Potter books. Game of Thrones, believe it or not, as a beginning fantasy reader, I would go and pick up Game of Thrones because the way it's written, it's multi-POV from the very beginning and it's very entertaining. There's not really a slog and the story pretty much just starts, you know. Yes, of course, there are details and lots of descriptions and all of these things, but it's entertaining from the very beginning. So, and the action and stuff happens very fast. Lots of controversial things happen in the very beginning and stuff like, oh my God, did that really just happen? Did I really just read that? So in terms of something that I think would grab your attention right away and get you into the category, Game of Thrones would be one of those series. And yeah, I wish actually that I read Game of Thrones earlier. The Crown of Oaths and Curses. So yeah, if you're curious about fantasy romance, I would start right here because it is everything done really, really well. If you want slow burn, this is slow burn. They actually hate each other and there's no romantic connection whatsoever in this first book. If you're looking for enemies to lovers, this is, they hate to lovers. This is enemies to lovers to the fullest of its extent. If you're looking for fae, you have fae. If you're looking for magic, you have magic. If you're looking for witches, you have witches. You have it all. So, and it's epic. It really, truly, yeah, it's a fantasy romance, but it really is a high fantasy novel written with the intention of having a romance at some point. But it's really high fantasy to me as far as I'm concerned, and it's so well done. To this day, I think it's the best thing that Jay Bree has written, and I'm a big fan of Jay Bree. I think I've read most everything that she's released in fantasy romance. I'm pretty sure I've read everything that she's released in fantasy romance. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Jay Bree, huge fan of this series, and yeah, this is a very safe place to start. A Throne of Glass. That's an easy choice. If you're looking for a high fantasy series, because this is high fantasy to me, if you're looking for a high fantasy series to get into that is complete, that has several books that are all very, very interesting, Throne of Glass and Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. If I read those separately, I wouldn't be super duper interested, but if you tandem read them, then it's a better way to do the story. But they're both very long though. And one of the books follows characters that you may or may not care about that much, so definitely tandem read those. Legendborn. This is so different from anything that you'll read in fantasy or fantasy romance, but Legendborn to me is a high fantasy as well. Yeah, it's high fantasy to me. It's also slow burn, so if you're looking for either one of those and you're a beginning reader, if you want to have a Black FMC in your reading, this is definitely a great place to start. Quest of Awakening. If you're looking for fantasy romance, now this is very much so fantasy romance, this is a great place to start. If you're looking for an interracial couple, if you're looking for an lead and you want fantasy, this is a great place to start. House in the Cerulean Sea. Also, if you're looking for a very diverse group of characters and also a fantasy that has a romance plot that's extremely family friendly or youth friendly, maybe I'll say, House in the Cerulean Sea is a great choice. I think if you're open-minded, this is just great for anyone to read, whatever your orientations are, sex or gender, or whatever your preferences are. I think this is great for everyone to read. So yeah, House on the Cerulean Sea, as well as Somewhere Beyond the Sea. Now, Avatar is a fantasy romance, okay? It is the fantasy romance. If you want to start reading fantasy romance or fantasy in general, you just want to get into it, but you want like a soft kind of introduction. Is it even a soft introduction? You want an epic story. You want a story that's really, really good. You want something that's going to catch your attention. You want to follow a couple or some couples. Avatar. All of the books that have been released so far, Avatar. Yes, Avatar. Yeah, start there. Start there. That's actually not where I started personally in reading fantasy romance. And I am going to recommend where I started personally in reading fantasy romance, which is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This was my introduction to fantasy romance. Before that, I hadn't read anything like that, like with the heavy romance plot. And that's good. Fourth Wing, as well as Iron Flame, as well as Onyx Storm. Even if you didn't like Iron Flame, people that didn't like Iron Flame still like Onyx Storm. I have personally liked all three books. This is literally where I started in reading fantasy romance, and I 100% recommend. The series is still ongoing, but you have an author that is pumping out the books. And you have an author writing a fantasy romance that started out as a romance writer. So the romance and the spice is always going to hit. And yeah, if that's what you're looking for, spicy romance and potentially an interracial couple. Rebecca Yarros has never really said whether or not that this is an interracial couple. She says that the main male character, the description is a Black dude. If you've not read that and you're interested in reading that, you definitely should. The Kindred's Curse Saga. So this is another fantasy romance that's really leaning heavy on the high fantasy. But I mean, there is a love story in there. I feel like the fantasy part could work without the love story. I would enjoy the story if there was no love connection. Versus Quest of Awakening, which I mentioned earlier, the love story is very much a part of it. And it's the reason why the two get together, and yeah, one can't exist without the other. This could exist. Like, this is just a high fantasy to me. But yeah, if that has a love plot, it's really, really good. Lots of twists and turns. I love twisty, turny authors. My reading year last year was crazy. My reading year last year was so good. And a lot of these books, like I'm recommending, and I read them last year, so I'm just thinking like, ooh. And hopefully we'll get finally book 4 in the Kindred's Curse Saga by Cole. Wolfsong. So this is the second series by TJ Klune that I'm going to recommend. The Cerulean Sea is very like gentle, youth friendly, I would say. The Wolfsong series is more adult. So you actually have some romantic scenes in this. I've only read the first book so far, but I am going to continue on in the series. And I really enjoy the more adult take of TJ Klune's writing. If you are interested in that and some romance, fantasy romance, then definitely pick this up. This is a fantasy romance because the story doesn't work without the romance plot. The last series that I'm going to recommend is by one of my favorite authors. I just cannot recommend the other series from her because it's dark fantasy romance, and I wouldn't want to start there. Lady of Darkness. If you did love Throne of Glass, then Lady of Darkness would be an easy and an obvious pickup. The stories are not the same. The first book in the Lady of Darkness series is very reminiscent of Game of Thrones, but the rest of the story is not really like that. It goes in its own direction completely, but it will be an easy pickup. If you liked one, you would like the other, and vice versa. So I would recommend that. We have found family in here. We have an romance, but it's not the main plot. We have shifters, we have fae, we have elemental magic, witches, vampire. We have pretty much everything in here. Gods, demigods, greens, beans, potatoes, tomatoes, lamb. There's pretty much everything in there that you may or may not be looking for. So this would be the last recommendation for the fantasy starter kit. If you want to start your journey in fantasy, I'd start here. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time. Ciao.